Every family has a mystery.
This is a multi-generational mystery.
Everyone's got their own version.
And I've asked New Zealanders to bring me theirs.
What's her history? Who was she?
Starting with a clue.
We found some artefacts. It's 100 years old.
Really? That opens a can of worms.
We believe my grandmother was a spy.
You haven't given me a lot to work with, I'm going to be honest.
I work with a team of experts.
It's signed in pencil.
Stop it, it is.
Dig into the archives.
Captain Alfred Fisher.
Cool. Finally see you.
And explore every possible angle
They were relocating Nazi war criminals.
They were right.
to uncover the hidden story
If ever you receive this, you will know me to be dead.
and ultimately solve mysteries that cross the globe and span generations.
Yeah, I've been hearing about this family mystery for as long as I can remember, really, ever since I was a kid. It's just a really interesting piece of my ancestry that I'd like to understand. So what I've brought in today is interesting as a talking point, is something that lots of different family members have it in their house. There's a lot of people that have got lots of different ideas, but I don't know if anyone necessarily knows exactly what the real story is.
Hey.
Hey, how are you going?
Good, Grant?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, what do you have for me?
This is a photo of my family.
Oh, beautiful.
My great-great-grandmother, my great-great-grandfather and their family.
Okay, so there's obviously some mystery surrounding this. Tell me a little bit about that.
I'm really interested to learn more about this man here. His name's Charles Blake, my great-great-grandfather. We don't know much beyond him arriving in New Zealand.
So you don't know where he arrived from?
No.
What do you know?
Well, lots of bits of information. You can see in the picture he's wearing a White Star Line sweatshirt or
yes,
jersey
true.
or something.
Yeah.
He jumped ship, I believe.
I love this guy. Really.
If you look at his obituary, which I've got under here as well,
okay.
it says in here that he was born in New Brunswick in Canada. And different people have actually said that's not necessarily correct.
Really?
He was supposedly born in the West Indies or Martinique. Antigua was one of the ones that came up. So it says in here there are links to his mother possibly being linked to slavery. I've heard stories about North American Indian. His father was a red-headed Irishman who was a sailor. So there's just a lot of conflicting information. So there's all these stories.
This is good. What is it in particular that intrigues your whole whānau?
Just knowing the ethnicity would be really interesting. So I have done a DNA test and I have got some African DNA. So that supports that theory of there could be slaves and it was from the area where there was slavery. I think that's just quite an interesting story. Yeah. Also just the fact that no one ever really could find out much information and it was almost like he didn't want people to necessarily know.
Is there something he was hiding?
Yeah, maybe, yeah. I do feel a little bit of pressure because obviously I don't know everyone that's connected and related to this photo. Other family members who have done quite a lot of research and I think between them they've got their own ideas. I mean, every time I talk to somebody there's something new, so it's just a really interesting piece of my ancestry that I'd like to understand.
Grant already knows he has African heritage. Our DNA and genealogy expert, Michelle, might be able to shed more light on his genetic background. or locate other descendants that could help us better understand Charles Blake's history. In the meantime, I've requested a copy of Charles's marriage certificate, and I'm going to see what other leads I can uncover. Interestingly, the first thing that comes up when searching for Charles Blake, American slave, is an article about Alan Blake, who played for the New Zealand Māori rugby team in the late 1940s. It appears he's the grandson of Charles Blake. I've decided to head to the Wairarapa, where Charles Blake and grandson Alan Blake lived. Papawai Marae is my first stop. I'm meeting the author, Malcolm Mulholland.
Hello, Chloe.
He wrote a book detailing the life of Charles's grandson, Alan Kiwi Blake.
Nau mai haere mai ki te wharepare mata Māori, so welcome to the home of Māori Parliament.
Thank you so much. Ngā mihi.
I'm keen to know how a person of supposed African descent came to play for the Māori All Blacks.
So in 1949, the World Cup was All Blacks versus South Africa. The All Blacks were going over to the Republic, but Māori were to be excluded from it. That included Kiwi Blake because, in his own words, he was dark-blooded. The Wairarapa selectors approached him and said, would you rather take a nomination for the Māori team? He looked at that, he thought, I'd like to play rugby, why not?
Okay, so did the wider public know that he wasn't Māori?
No. They had no idea. I think some of the players may have had an inkling. So Kingy Matthews, for example, who played a lot of rugby with him, actually helped him fabricate his whakapapa, if you like.
Crazy times, hey?
Yeah.
This story really resonates with me because my father is from Zimbabwe, so he's African. And as a kid, I was always really ashamed of that. And yeah, always just told everybody that I was Māori and was desperate to be Māori because that was kind of an acceptable thing, but also just because I love the culture and just everything about it and just that sense of belonging. And it's just interesting that there is an indication that Charles Blake potentially felt the same way as I did, you know?
But that's okay, Sonia, because Kiwis paved the way now to be an honorary Māori, and we'd be proud to have you.
Oh my God. You don't know how happy that makes me. So we know that Kiwi Blake wasn't Māori. Do we know where he came from? That's what I want to find out.
Yeah, good question. So I've got a recording of him.
Really?
Yeah. Let's listen into what he actually has to say.
My grandfather was a quarter Negro. Had a quarter Negro in him.
Do you know much about your African-American ancestry? Your grandfather came from Canada.
Well, he came out in the White Star Line as a sailor from Canada.
That was amazing. You have a recording of Charles Blake's grandson saying that he was quarter Negro and was born in Canada. So it's really interesting that Kiwi said he came on the White Star Line because I have this photo of him wearing a White Star Line sweater.
That's so cool.
Isn't it?
So cool. He was very sure of where he came from, and it turns out, looking at this, that it was all true.
Despite Alan Blake's certainty, Malcolm still thinks I should talk to Wairarapa historian Gareth Winter. He's studied the Blake family records extensively.
Oh, wow. Beautiful. What I've found out from Malcolm about Charles Blake is that he was quarter African. He came to New Zealand from Canada on the White Star.
Okay, so to start with, I think the story about the White Star is probably wrong.
Grant came to me looking for answers. Where did his great-great-grandfather, Charles Blake, really come from? Family stories include tales of a mysterious traveller who arrived in Aotearoa from the Caribbean or Canada. One fact the family is pretty sure about is that Charles arrived aboard a White Star vessel. He then jumped ship to make Aotearoa his home. But historian Gareth Winter isn't so sure.
Okay, so to start with, I think the story about the White Star is probably wrong. The White Star Line started sailing to New Zealand after Charles Blake arrived in New Zealand.
Really?
The first time we can find a mention of him in New Zealand in 1882, he's on the electoral roll at Otaria Station. So the White Star Line started in 1883, a little bit after he arrived.
Okay, I was so sure about the White Star Line because he's wearing the jumper.
Absolutely. As I say, I've seen that photograph.
Also, I heard a recording of his grandson saying he came on the White Star Line.
Oh, that's interesting, because in the archive, we often referred to people's family stories as not always being correct, but nonetheless being true. So the story undoubtedly was that he was a seaman, came to New Zealand on a ship, and then later on someone seen the photo with the White Star Line and put two and two together and said, oh, must have come on a White Star Line ship. But it doesn't look like he did, actually. So we've got another funny document that sort of illustrates part of the story. During World War I, people who enlisted in New Zealand had to sign an attestation form, and it included details of where your parents were born. This is Hinton Blake's attestation form. Now, this is Charles's son. When he joins the army, he doesn't actually fill in where his parents were born. Either he didn't know, or maybe he didn't want to say.
Yes. Thought it would work against him.
Yeah. On the other hand, his brother George, he says his father was born in Canada.
What you've shown me points towards Charles being born in Canada.
I think this points to the fact that he was telling his children he was born in Canada.
Okay.
That's a slightly different thing to him actually being born there. It's possible that he was born in St John, Canada, because there was quite an established community of Africans that had escaped slavery in the United States.
Right, okay, so that was one of the theories. Another theory from his family is he was born in Antigua.
If he was born in Antigua, or he came from Antigua, his ancestry would definitely be slavery. So if he was from Antigua, becoming a sailor would be a natural way to get away from there.
Yes, and also leave it behind because that's a source of shame.
Exactly.
Where to from here?
So we know from a newspaper report from his obituary, which reported that A, he was born in Canada, and B, that he came on the St Leonard. I think you need to look and see what you can find in the shipping records related to the St Leonard. There'll be records to find.
Yeah?
And hopefully some kind of a glimmer of information as well.
Gareth has helped me debunk the story that Charles travelled to New Zealand on the White Star Line. And now, I'm not entirely convinced he came from Canada either. So I've reached out to genealogist Michelle to track down old shipping records. I'm hoping she can get closer to the truth.
So we have this lovely shipping crew list of the St Leonards. Now, the microfilm you can see here wasn't really great, but it gave us information about the ship and when they left. New Zealand is one of those places on the list. And when we head further into the actual shipping list...
Aha. Bingo.
Bingo, exactly. C. Blake. If you read across, it tells you where he says he's from.
Antigua. So, Do you think this is the Charles Blake?
For a number of reasons, yes. But we want to keep going
Oh, you got more
because...
for me.
Well,
bring it on.
The story is he jumped ship. And if you go to the end of this shipping document, when the ship departs Wellington, Lambton Quay, the crew must have had a pretty good time because quite a few of them didn't get back on board. So you'll actually see his name here.
I hereby certify that the named, few names here, M. Kelly and C. Blake, have been left behind on the alleged ground of their having deserted.
Which is a term for jump ship.
Wow. So this is confirming what Gareth said.
And it moves our research from Canada to the Caribbean.
Antigua, yeah, exactly.
And we've gone back ship after ship after ship.
Wow.
And every time he writes Antigua. Wow. So we have this consistent record from 1871 through to 1879 of him saying he's from Antigua.
All right, Michelle, amazing. Thank you so much for your work. What's the next steps?
We've been doing some analysis on Grant's DNA. His father wasn't a Blake, so he's not carrying the deeper DNA we need to test, which is the Y chromosome.
Okay.
So what we really need is a direct male descendant.
Right, yeah.
So I've done some research and found a guy called Ian Blake. So what we ideally need is a big Y test with family tree DNA.
Okay. Grant came to me wanting to know the origins of his great-great-grandfather, Charles Blake. I've pored over shipping records, and I've been able to establish that before arriving in Aotearoa, Charles always recorded his birthplace as Antigua, in the Caribbean. So, I've obtained a DNA sample from a direct male descendant, Ian. Genealogist Michelle and I can now look for clues hiding in the big Y DNA. Okay, Michelle, I am very excited to see these results.
So the testing we've done and the people that match Ian and the other relatives like Grant, they all have certain amounts of African heritage in their results. That indicates that Charles Blake was more than half African by percentage when you go backwards.
Okay.
So it's likely he's a descendant of someone who was enslaved back in Antigua. But wait, there's more. Here's all the people that have tested that match Ian, and you'll see almost all of them have Irish heritage.
Interesting. Interesting, because Grant said there was a rumour that there was a red-haired Irishman somewhere in the picture. So now that we know that Charles Blake's father had Irish heritage, does that mean his mother has African heritage?
So when I look at not just Ian's DNA results, but lots of other family members have done testing, and I can look at the amount of heritage they have of African heritage. They have so much that it must be that both parents had African heritage, not just one.
Ah, okay, so it could potentially be Charles Blake's grandfather that was Irish?
Or even great-grandfather.
Right. When you see the African heritage, can you distinguish that it's Caribbean African?
No. The same for people who are enslaved in Barbados, Jamaica, or in mainland USA. All of them show their heritages coming back to Africa. But we have plenty of evidence that already says Charles is from Antigua. And in addition, there's lots of evidence of Blake, people with this surname, on the island. What we need to know is who was there at the time. Are there some baptism records? What sort of records can we find on the island, because so much isn't digitised?
So you're saying I need to go to Antigua?
That's going to be the only place we're going to find answers to this mystery.
And I think it's time for me to talk to Grant. So, Grant, we have a record of Charles Blake's journeys from 1871 to 1878 when he jumped ship to New Zealand. Now, in all of these places, he listed his name, his age, and his birthplace. He was born 1851 or there or thereabouts in Antigua. And one thing we just discovered, there was a Blake estate in St. John's in Antigua.
Wow.
So it's very likely that that is where Charles Blake's family was from. We believe he was the descendants of slaves.
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. We can't know that from here. So, in order to find out more, we need to go to the Caribbean.
Cool.
So what I want to know from you is, do you want to go to Antigua?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Great.
Yeah.
We're going. Antigua is a beautiful island in the Caribbean with a vibrant multicultural community. But it was a different story in the early 1800s. Back then, numerous slave estates dotted the landscape. We head to the Museum of Antigua. We're after any information to help prove our theory that Charles's parents may have come from the Blake estate. We've called on local historian Dr. Reg Murphy to help answer some questions. So, Charles Blake's parents, Grant's ancestors, were slaves, we're pretty sure. Tell us about what life was like for slaves here.
Well, I don't think they had much of a life. In this hot tropical sun, you have to plant the sugar cane, the stalks. That's the easy part. When the harvest time comes, you have like maybe 2 or 3 weeks to clear it all, cut it all, process it all. So you're working 24/7. So life was short, it was cheap, it was difficult. It was, and you're tied to that estate. There are people who were born and raised and died in the same place.
What about for the children? What was life like for them?
The youngest, the babies who needed to be fed, they were strapped onto the mother while she's working all day long. From the time they were actually mobile, they weren't allowed any to roam around and play as kids. They had to be highly controlled.
So if you're born into slavery, you're owned by the owners.
Yes.
You're not owned by your parents. You're the property of the
You're
owners.
the property.
So that, if I had a baby, it could be taken from me.
And sold. Yep.
So what do we know about Blake's estate?
That was a heart of Christian society. The first Methodists to come to Antigua started preaching Methodism to the slaves. And they set up a chapel and a schoolhouse on Blake's estate. So the first people to be educated among blacks in Antigua happened at Blake's estate. Everyone took the name of the estate because you identify as the property of that person. So you're always a Blake or you're a Codrington, or you're whatever the name of the nearest estate is.
So how many people would have been on the Blake's estate?
On average, you needed at least 200 fit, able-bodied people to run an estate. The National Archives here, they have the slave registers. They have the registry of all the enslaved people of every estate. And you just might find your ancestor's mother's name.
Okay, well, I think that's a good place to head to, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds awesome.
Let's go to the archives.
We head to the National Archives to check the slave records from the Blake estate. Such sensitive and delicate documents can't be handled or filmed, but the archives are happy to help where they can.
Thank you.
And I'm armed with Charles Blake's marriage certificate, on which he has listed his parents' names.
Right, you've seen this. This is Charles Blake's marriage records. So this is where he listed his parents as Mary Blake, née Daniel, and Charles Blake. His father's name is the same. So, this is the good one. This is what they called a triennial slave return. Every 3 years, the slave owners had to list the slaves that they owned. If we come down, here's Charles. Over here, Maria Daniel.
Wow.
Who was listed as Charles's mother. So we know now that both Charles Blake's parents were born into slavery on the Blake estate.
That's sad. It's quite sad.
It is sad.
Yeah.
It is sad, especially knowing now that how horrendous their lives were.
Like, we obviously had Charles's name and had like an idea of a couple of places he could have come from, but that was as far as we'd ever gone. So this is like now confirming that next step.
Yeah. Do you kind of go, wow, everything I find out makes me a little bit more connected to this
Oh,
place?
yeah, definitely, yeah. It's a real weird feeling to know that, you know, like my ancestors would have been on the streets here and, like, you know, they had children here and stuff. So, yeah, it is, and, like, you know, maybe looked at the same view or whatever. So it's quite, yeah, quite...
It's nuts.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
nuts.
yeah.
Grant must have mixed emotions. He has proof that he's now in his ancestors' homeland, but he now also knows the tough life they must have led. But there's still more to do. Where does the Irish DNA fit in? And what remains of the Blake estate? Can we get Grant actually standing where his family once did? I'm trying to figure out where Grant's great-great-grandfather, Charles Blake, came from. I found his parents on a slave register here in Antigua. And Dr. Reg Murphy is sharing with us the incredibly tough life Grant's ancestors faced under slavery.
What they would have lived in with a dirt floor, and they are known to have all had foot infections and diseases and things are called triggers, which laid eggs in their feet. So you're living in nature. And to think that there would have been hundreds of these across the 50 acres around here.
Yeah.
The mill towers were used to grind sugarcane, and they offer something tangible for Grant to gain some insight into their enslaved lives.
Maybe you work 18 to 20 hours a day, and you're exhausted. Human life was cheap back then. Easy to replace
so people would have definitely died here.
Yeah. Or lose limbs, lose arms, you know, anything. You get a shirt caught in it, you can't get it off. It's going to pull you up into that. Okay, this is the west entrance to the boiling house. This is where they actually worked. They built this, the keystones, the brick lining, and that little trim that goes all the way along.
Do you think they would have made it nice because it was such a horrible job?
But to me, this says something. They weren't, you don't force somebody to do something nice like this. To cut and shape a stone like that all the way through consistently says, I'm a craftsman, yes, I'm enslaved, but I'm going to leave behind something that I can be proud of and people will know. And you may not know my name, but this is what I've left behind.
It's interesting. I've been to so many different sites before around the world, but never been to one that's so closely linked to me. So it's quite amazing. Yeah.
But Grant has both African and Irish DNA from the Blake side of the family. So how did this end up in the mix?
The Irish had the secrets of building mill towers. So a lot of them are brought in to do stonework. So that genetic residue was here. And also, they kept coming as workers.
Right, even in the 1830s, there would have been Irishmen working alongside the slaves.
Yeah, especially
not treated as badly.
Irish were never treated properly anywhere they went. They were always supposed to be troublemakers and papists.
I mean, ultimately, we'll never know. It's just interesting, you know. I guess interesting for you guys, and we can see by the photo that you know, there is some light skin in...
and I have met people with dark skin with red hair. Not
okay.
shocking red, but it has a red tinge to it.
Yeah. So, Reg, Charles Blake left, we think, in 1871 on a ship. What sort of skills would he have needed to actually get on the ship he came on?
If he had a skill, it would have been easier for him. Or if he could read and write, and being mixed race would make him more favorable. And he looks like a no-nonsense kind of person. He looks like he knew how to get by the system. He's not going to sit in the corner and wait for a job. Yeah, he's a mover and a shaker. And the fact he ended up in where he did says this guy knew what he was doing. He had a plan.
I think that's partly why the photo is so important to our family as well, is because he just does look like an interesting character. You know? Like, so, yeah.
You got some good stories.
Yeah.
Betty's hope has been enlightening. But this is not the Blake estate where Charles was enslaved. However, we have a lead on a location with some crumbling remains. This might just put Grant back on Charles Blake's whenua.
So this is a little bit thornier than I had predicted or hoped for. But I feel like we're close. Oh, there it is.
Amazing.
Yeah. This is where Charles and his family lived, where Charles was born. Here we are, on your ancestors' whenua. This was the Blake estate. And that's the Blake mill. Pretty much the same as the one we saw on a smaller scale. The manager's house would have been somewhere around here. Sugarcane everywhere. Just a proper working mill. But one that your family were part of, a very big part of.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah. You know, thinking that Charles left here and went on this adventure to New Zealand, and then I've been on this adventure coming back to find where he's from. It's just like the icing on the cake, really, like just to be literally on the land that the ancestors were on. So, yeah, it's amazing.
Grant's mystery was simply about discovering who his great-great-grandfather was and where he came from. However, unravelling this next mystery will be an entirely different challenge.
When you learn something, you can't get rid of it. It's always going to be there, unless you get the answer. This mystery will have affected lots of people, in particular my brother Ross and I. I feel about the mystery nearly every day.
When you say I feel about the mystery, does that mean you think about the mystery?
Yes, and feel that there's something missing.
Hello.
Hi.
You must be Ruve.
I am.
And Ross?
Yes.
You've got a family mystery.
I'll let Ross tell you because he was the one that discovered the mystery in the very first place. So,
Okay.
So when Mum passed in 2012, we discovered her birth certificate, and she was a twin.
What?
Yes. We never knew.
Did she know?
Obviously.